To Matuan? Avi stood up in surprise, having lost some sense of subordination. The rainbow orblings from Regul 5, which had been cruising leisurely beneath the office ceiling, fled in different directions like a flock of huge soap bubbles scattered by a small tornado. The office of Anton Hansen, the almighty owner of the Intergalactic Services Corporation, was located virtually outside the Iona orbital station. Only a sigma field membrane separated the exquisitely luxurious environment from the icy vacuum. Maintaining a sigma field envelope of such a diameter required incredible energy. Avi estimated it would take the output from at least a couple of medium-power quark reactors. When you're given a task by the owner of such an office, you must listen, even if the task seems like a crazy whim. "Excuse me, sir, but what's the point?" Avi asked. He thought his relationship with Hansen was good enough, even close as it could be, given the gap in their financial and social status, but still not close enough to allow him to say, "What kind of idiotic idea is that? Matuan is such a backwater. Why do we need it? It's too far away. If it wasn't, tourists would have been pouring in long ago." Hansen, dressed in the latest fashion of billionaires, in a living veil from Ptolemy II, waved his hand with a glass clasped in it. From this movement, a few drops of golden firelight liquor, with extract from crystal mushrooms of Electra and pheromone additives made from the flowers of treehouses from the planet Adson, spilled out of the glass. Those few drops cost more than Avi earned in a year. Avi looked at the slightly trembling living veil that covered Hansen's body and partially Hansen's arms and legs and shuddered. Some fashion trends were too much even for him. "We should always try to look at the perspective of a subject from a new point of view," Hansen said. "I thought you should know that, with your experience." Avi hated it when his boss alluded to his past. He'd come to the IST with a degree in xenobiology, a stint in the Federation Diplomatic Corps on Grace of God, and a few years on a smuggler's shuttle in the Z sector. It all didn't seem like time was well spent for him, but his boss insisted that it was in the varied experience that the success of one of the best ISC operatives lay. "Did you hear that the great queen of the Sulpadians had authorized the allocation of 2 minor swarms?" Of course. Avi tried to figure out what this had to do with his sudden deployment to Matuan. Sulpadians swarmed pretty often, and every now and then, the great queen, instead of destroying her rivals, would authorize the separation of minor swarms. In exchange for their complete loyalty to the Great Hive, of course. But what does this have to do with intergalactic? We don't seem to be in the business of large-scale colony ships. Why, maybe we should. Hansen took another careless sip worth several $100,000 and set the glass on the table. But the point is different. Anyway, one of the minor swarms bought a planet in the Dago system from the Federation that was worthless in most aspects, but suitable enough to start a new hive, and the official who made the deal somehow overlooked the fact that the planet was inhabited. Avi stared at the chief in surprise. The Federation had sold the planet to the Sulpadians along with the population? He shook his head incredulously. "No. I've known about government corruption, but something like that, I don't believe it." "Population is a strong word," Hansen replied. Perhaps this foreign ministry official was really out of touch. Maybe he used outdated data. These people arrived there only about 10 years ago and didn't register as a new colony. In fact, that was their plan. They don't recognize any governments and specifically choose a place where they wouldn't be disturbed. The Brotherhood of Cosmic Light. Have you ever heard of them? Avi shrugged. The galaxy was full of the most amazing religions and sects, and it was hard to keep track of them all. Not that it was that exciting either. "Well, never mind," Hansen said, obviously pleased that he had discovered something he knew more about than his assistant. "They are very few, only a few dozen people. When the foreign ministry discovered that they had sold a populated planet to the Sulpadians, of course, they got nervous, and they decided to find a hole where they could shove the cultists in without much fuss. They only dream of such a hole anyway. Avi began to realize what was going on, and it was finally decided to move these cultists to Matuan, he asked. And who came up with the idea? I did. Hansen grinned. They were in a bit of a state of confusion, I'd say even panic, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to milk the Federation. So I made a quick retroactive license for the exclusive use of Matuan and casually asked the right people if they could use a cozy little planet on the backside of the galaxy. Avi remained silent. The chief's ability to extract huge profits as if by magic had long ago ceased to surprise him. All in all, it worked out just fine, and everyone was happy, Hansen summarized, but there didn't seem to be much pleasure in his voice. Something must have gone wrong in the end, or else why Chief is sending him to Matuan. Where does my business trip fit into this scheme? Avi asked, seeing that the chief was waiting for him to take the initiative. Hansen waved away an orbling that flew too close to his head. This is the worst part, he said without enthusiasm. The cultists had no trouble getting to Matuan and settling there, but when the Migration Board Commission investigators flew there 6 months later, they found no one. What do you mean? Avi asked. They'd gone somewhere else? That's what I have to find out. Hansen shook his head. But given that they didn't have their own ship and the officials found the abandoned camp, it seems that something happened on the planet itself, and now the foreign ministry is charging me with the claim that I withheld data about Matuan's danger to the colonists. Hansen looked directly into Avi's eyes. So get over there and discover what happened before this scandal goes supernova. You realize the government would love to blow this case out of proportion to cover up their blunder in selling off a populated planet. I'm counting on you. When Avi was already in the doorway, Hansen called out to him. Oh, and one more thing. The case is exceptional, so I've found you a partner to match it. Avi looked questioningly at the chief. Don't worry. I know you're used to working alone, Hansen said. But this guy won't get in your way. On the contrary, I think you've heard of him. He's an exopsychologist, and his name is Sven Tomberg. Thank God the famous exopsychologist was not as pompous as Avi had feared, but he looked much older than his 35 years, so much so that Avi first wondered if Hansen had gotten it wrong. Sven obviously noticed the new partner's confusion because he smiled friendly and extended his fragile pigmented hand first. Sven Tomberg, he introduced himself formally. But of course, you already know. Avi Neumal. Avi shook the scientist's hand, which was unexpectedly strong. Of course, I was warned of your arrival. It's just that you look more... He was suddenly embarrassed, something that hadn't happened to him in a long time. Don't worry, Avi. I'm used to it, Sven said. In fact, I'm now looking better. After the incident on Agasphere, I was in much worse shape. Of course, Avi silently cursed. How could he forget? The information temporal shock on Agasphere, which had stolen a good chunk of Tomberg's and some of the expedition's other members' lives. I'm sorry, Avi said. I told you not to. Sven looked around the interior of the main cabin with curiosity. It's not a bad ship. For its size, it's excellent. I bet the personal cabins are decent too. Hansen must be a pretty generous employer. Avi was glad the scientist had changed the subject. That depends, I guess, he said. Personally, I'm not complaining. Is this your first time working for Intergalactic? Yes, Sven sighed. After my forced retirement from the Science Corps, it took me some time to, restore my health. But after that, I was still faced with the question, what to do now? The doctors say that despite all the circumstances, I have at least 30 years of active life ahead of me. Although the core pension allows me to indulge in idleness, I'm not psychologically ready for it. I may look like Methuselah's older brother, but I don't feel like that. So when I got the offer from your chief, I didn't hesitate long. But I'm afraid you'll have to do most of the legwork. I'm not very good at it anymore. I'm used to it, Avi said. I've been on planets way more unpleasant than Matuan. By the way, what about the planet? Sven asked. I haven't had time to familiarize myself with the materials. It was only 24 hours from my agreement to my arrival on your ship. As far as I know, it's somewhere on the edge of the desolation. That's right. That's right. Avi picked up the exopsychologist's bag, noting that the scientist was clearly accustomed to the bare minimum of necessities. The bag was light and not too bulky. But I suggest that we don't waste time on talking now. We have a long way to go. We will have time to study and discuss everything on the way. The war between the Qatar and the Mercurians ended in mutual annihilation 1,000,000 years ago. But the galaxy has never fully healed the scar that conflict left on it. Thousands upon thousands of devastated star systems with planets turned into dead balls of stone or no planets at all, but with several asteroid belts. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the Qatar and Mercurian technology was still inferior to the fantastic structures of the precursors in terms of durability, and most of it could not survive such a long time. Humans and the other races that inhabited the galaxy were left with only majestic ruins on lifeless planets and very rare finds that had long since lost even a hint of functionality. This area, far enough away from the densely populated sectors of the galaxy, was unofficially named Desolation. The planet Matuan was discovered by accident. A Canadian Commonwealth research ship had gotten off course over 2 centuries ago. It was, for some time, stuck in the Matuan system. The Canadians gave the same name both to the star and the only habitable planet, more concerned with how they could repair the jump engines. The Canadians hastily surveyed the planet and departed as soon as they were able to get the engines working. The reason was simple. The planet was too far to colonize. Besides, the planet lay literally on the edge of the desolation, which was almost superstitiously feared by many intelligent races, including the Canadians. Who would want to live near a giant 1,000,000-year-old graveyard? Occasionally, other scouts visited the planet and left with approximately the same impression. Despite a good climate and not too aggressive biosphere, the planet had no special advantages that could make Matuan attractive from the point of view of potential colonization. There were plenty of worlds suitable for settlement in the galaxy. Then, one of the most meticulous researchers discovered the Rainbow Valley, an unusual formation in the mountainous region, a giant crystalline formation in volcanic rock, several tens of square kilometers in size. It would seem to be an excellent object to attract tourists. But everything was again broken by the remoteness of the planet. Of course, the jump engines had become much more efficient since Matuan's discovery, and it took 3 weeks to get to the planet, instead of 6 months. But it was still too long. Nothing was interesting on the planet besides Rainbow Valley. No one would spend a month plus for a landmark that could be fully discovered at a leisurely pace in half a day. Matuan had remained a half-forgotten world until Hansen pulled his scam with the Federation and the Sulpadians. Sven and Avi learned all this and some other specific details: mass, percentage of land and sea, atmospheric composition, summary of major animal and plant species, from the few previous research reports during their journey to Matuan. They also remarkably improved their skills at Go, chess, and Sulpadia Norpong, and their physical performance at the gym was to the best of their abilities. In short, they were desperately bored the whole way, and Avi was beginning to think it might be a good idea to find some new species on the planet, like tyrannosaurs or dust devils from Castrum 3, to hunt. "You think the situation on the planet when we get there will not be enough to energize you?" Sven asked. As Avi overcame the embarrassment that his new partner looked twice his age, they quickly switched to a friendly tone. "Frankly, I doubt it," Avi said. "I'm beginning to think these cultists just ate some local fungi and died in the jungle or something. I mean, as much as I want to have fun, there's nothing more dangerous on this planet than poisonous mushrooms, and certainly no species that can eat a bunch of fanatics. What if it was some kind of bacteria or virus? Then there'd be graves and dead bodies," Avi countered. "No, I'm telling you, they did something wrong. Maybe they killed themselves by drowning in the ocean. I've heard that happens to cultists sometimes." "Maybe, but I don't think so." Sven thought for a moment. "I'm interested in this Rainbow Valley. There's not much information about it in the reports except that it has a lot of crystals." "What kind?" "Why not a word about it?" "And that it's beautiful. By the way, it's not far from where those, what's their name? Brothers of Cosmic Light have settled." Avi checked the report and hummed in surprise. "Maybe you got something here." "You think so?" Avi looked at Sven with respect. The guy was a quick thinker after all. They had settled 15 kilometers from the anomaly, almost next door to it. "Do you think this has something to do with the disappearance?" Sven shrugged. "That's what we'll find out first, as soon as we get there." Avi stood up and stretched with pleasure, crunching almost every joint. "I don't usually anticipate going in guns blazing, especially in such dark cases of missing people. But I'm ready for anything now, just to stretch my legs a little." Sven looked at him carefully. "Why? Have you often had to investigate disappearances?" Avi answered with the same direct look. "You don't even want to know," he replied. The local sun was almost at its highest, and it was a little hotter than Avi would have liked in the open countryside, but he enjoyed it all the same. Everything felt nice. The vastness, the slightly stuffy light wind, the blue sky, the greenery around him, and the unfamiliar foreign smell. He was lucky with the last one, by the way. Not always a complex of flavors of another planet leaves at least a tolerable impression. Matuan smelled of a tart mixture, remotely reminiscent of the mixed scent of a flower garden and some chemicals. The odor was a bit pungent, but Avi quickly got used to it. Avi landed the shuttle a couple kilometers from the abandoned cultist village on the edge of a large forested area. The outermost buildings were in plain sight, standard fast-built plastic cottages, a perfect landmark amidst Matuan's unspoiled nature. Avi headed toward them across a field of thick but relatively low grass. The grass was tangled and pretty stiff, and his feet stuck in it. After a few minutes, Avi was sweating, but it was still better than the dull panels of the ship's interior cladding. From time to time, Avi glanced up at the blue peaks of the mountain range on the horizon. Somewhere out there was the Rainbow Valley. "Nice planet," came the voice of Sven in his earpiece, who had stayed in the ship in geostationary orbit and was watching through a pair of cameras built into Avi's gear. "Those are usually the ones where you get the worst surprises," Avi said. "I disagree," Sven said. "It's just that people tend to be more relaxed on planets like this. If you were surrounded by poisonous fumaroles and lava lakes, you'd be as focused as you could be. But in blooming fields under the warm sun, few people can stay frosty." Avi thought about it and immediately stumbled over a particularly wicked tangle of grass. "Yeah, I guess there's something to it," he said, shaking the fluff of flying seeds off the pants of his protective coveralls. Maybe the cultists fell for it too. The grass ended, giving way to densely compacted soil between the houses. Not a blade of grass was visible in the passages of the settlement. It had obviously been specially treated with some kind of defoliants. It seemed unnecessarily barbaric to Avi, but on the other hand, he understood the settlement's inhabitants. Walking through the local grass was a curse, probably as bad as mowing it regularly. "I'm in the village," he said. "Not a soul in sight yet, and it looks abandoned. It looks like we'll have to agree with the commission's conclusions here. Commission or not, but we'll have to see for ourselves, so go as planned." Over the next hour, Avi went house by house through the village. There were only 46 people, including a few families, so the houses were few. 24, including outbuildings. He found no signs of fighting, no signs that the settlement had been abandoned in a hurry, but there was also no sign of anyone packing up for the road. It was as if all the inhabitants had suddenly, quietly, unhurriedly, gotten up in what they were wearing and left in an unknown direction. That was strange. Avi slowly rotated 360 degrees, standing in the middle of the small central square so that Sven could feel the spooky atmosphere of the abandoned village. Between the houses at the southern end, the remnants of a vegetable garden and an established fruit orchard, already overgrown with local weeds, were visible. Some local creeping plants were already climbing up the thin trunks of the saplings. I've seen a lot of things, but this one was very uncomfortable. Frankly, I'd feel a lot better if this place was covered in shell casings and blood. At least it would be clear what's up. As of now, I'm just thinking of all sorts of crazy things. "Like what?" Sven asked immediately. "I am asking not out of idle curiosity. You're an experienced man, and your hunches and impressions are worth a lot. For example, that they've all fallen into another dimension," Avi said with a chuckle. "Or were kidnapped by a super race for experimentation. I think I've read too much cheap sci-fi on this flight." "Experiments, you say?" Sven said thoughtfully. "Experiments are my specialty. We'll figure it out. Listen, there is one other building on the commission blueprint named Temple of Light. It's about 1 kilometer to the west. We should check that too. Can't see anything from here, but there's a big hill, probably blocking the view. Moving out." The building, proudly labeled Temple on the plan, was the same standard barracks, only larger. Like most of the other buildings, its doors were ajar. Avi cautiously walked around the house and peered through one of the windows, almost expecting to see something horrible that would reveal the mystery of the people's disappearance. Nothing. Empty, dusty benches and passageways through which a draft lazily rolled dry debris that had been accidentally brought inside during months of desertion. "Wait," Sven said as Avi was about to leave. "What's that at the far end of the hall?" Avi looked closer, and a brilliant, iridescent sparkle struck him from the dusty semi-darkness. "So Rainbow Valley it is," Avi said, looking at the sparkling crystal on a special pedestal. Sven had called it an altar, but Avi still couldn't believe that someone could be stupid enough to worship a piece of mineral. "I'm not sure of anything yet," Sven said, "but you'd better not touch it just in case. You'll have to walk to Rainbow Valley, though, if only to rule out any unnecessary coincidences." Avi looked at the crystal carefully. It was amazing how beautiful it was. It was as if the sunlight had gotten inside, lost in a billion inner facets, and split into all parts of the spectrum, which began to play catch-up. The colored sparks shimmered into each other. "Avi!" Sven's shout brought Avi out of his stupor. He woke up and turned away from the tantalizing light play of the crystal with difficulty. "Yes, I heard you," he said dryly, "but I'm not going on foot. 15 kilometers in the heat and off-road. It's crazy. See if there's a place for the shuttle to land. He thought his first impression of the crystal had prepared him for the panorama of Rainbow Valley, but he had no idea how wrong he was. As he stepped out from behind the rocky ledge on the pass, he stood still for a few minutes, stunned by the sight before him. The fractal ocean of iridescent flame was so striking that at first glance, he couldn't even make out the details of the landscape, as if Avi were looking at a stereo screen with a psychedelic screensaver instead of a mountain valley. "Wow," Sven said. Obviously, the incredible sight amazed him too, even considering the not-so-great quality of the picture from the small cameras. The travel agencies have made a big mistake. I think people would have willingly traveled 6 months for something like this. Avi shook his head, chasing away the obsession. "You know, all the old valley pictures look much more modest," he said. "And it's not just the equipment's imperfections. Some are made with much cooler equipment than I'm wearing." "I agree," said Sven. "Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, iridescent shimmers. Yes, huge crystal clusters glittering in the sun, but it's not even close to this. Looks like something has been happening in the valley since the last time it was visited. Somehow it's evolving, if that's what it is, of course. But actually, there's something else I want to tell you, which worries me more than the light music." "What is it?" Avi asked, instantly alarmed. "You'd think a show like this would be obvious from orbit, even in the daytime, especially with the unremarkable dark mountains all around. But I can't see much of anything. There are just occasional light reflections, no more than from a small mountain lake." Avi raised his head to the sky. "Maybe some kind of aerial lens? I don't seem to notice anything, but hell knows my eyes are a little blurry from all this disco." "I don't see anything either," Sven said, "and all the equipment is silent. I'll try to play with the settings, but I'm no atmospheric expert." Avi turned his gaze back to the valley. His eyes seemed to get used to it, and he began to recognize the regular rocky surface between the giant conglomerates of crystals shimmering with reflected light. "I'll try to go down," Avi said. "It's passable. Listen, something else occurred to me. Why did none of the research missions take samples of crystals from the valley? We don't even know what they are." "That's a good point," Sven said. "There's something fishy going on. So be careful out there. If you smell anything, you come right back." "Don't jinx it," said Avi. "I still hope it's all just nature's light music. Damn, I must be getting old. I forgot I can polarize my visor." After turning on the helmet's visor's polarization, Avi was immediately relieved. The iridescent reflections in the crystals were still weaving their hypnotic fractal patterns, but they were no longer blinding. Avi made his way down to the bottom of the valley, where there was surprisingly more room. "Sven, I think I see something ahead," he said, looking around. "It looks like an artificial structure, though I can't see it because of the crystals. I'm heading that way." "Be careful," Sven reminded him again, but Avi was already in full battle mode. He took the safety off his assault rifle just in case, even though he had no idea what he was going to shoot at. A few minutes later, Avi reached the location. "I'll be jeesh," he muttered, stunned. "Sven, are you seeing this too?" The answer from his partner came only after a few seconds. "If you mean an ancient spaceship of completely unknown construction, then yes," Sven finally said. "I see it too. It's not a hallucination or a mirage." The ship wasn't very big, probably even smaller than the one Tomberg was in on the orbit. It was hard to tell for sure, since it was partially obscured by piles of crystals. And it looked ancient and alien. None of the known space races of the galaxy had ever built a ship like this. There was no symmetry, a weird chaos of sharp angles and edges, and yet it was clear that it was a ship. It looks like it was here before Rainbow Valley was formed, Avi said. Judging by the mass of crystals right on the hull, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but don't you think that's what we're seeking? Of course, after is not always the same as because, but I do, said Sven. Look closely at the geometry of the ship itself. Doesn't it remind you of anything? Avi took a closer look and suddenly realized. The dark metal of the hull seemed alien against the glow of the valley, even if it was muted by the visor. But after Sven's remark, it was clear that the unusual combination of the ship's facets repeated the most common shapes of the crystals that filled the valley. Avi noted this strange metal's almost complete lack of corrosion and wear. Do you think this thing created the valley? It could very well be, Sven said. It could very well be, Sven said. Listen, is everything okay with your cameras down there? I'm losing the picture. I think so. The batteries and indicators are all green. Maybe it's this lens or whatever, blocking the view or some kind of interference from the crystals. There didn't seem to be anything about that in the reports. I can hear you fine, but anyway, let's have a quick look around and get out of there, and then we'll decide what to do next. The ship is a unique find, but it's not worth the risk, especially since we're not here for it, Avi added as he approached the massive hull. Interesting. It's like there's a hatch open, and all this crystalline jungle seems to have sprouted from there. At least that's what it looks like. Oh, shit. Avi, what's going on down there? Sven called out anxiously. Avi squeezed the rifle's grip, though it was useless now. I found our missing colonists, he said. And it's very, very bad news. Looks like the damn commission was right. Damn. That's a scary sight. I think Hansen will have a hard time proving in court that his conclusion that Matuan was safe for the colonists was valid. Avi waved his hand. He'd get away with it, not the first time. And even if he didn't, he'd find a way to profit from it. It was a unique discovery. I thought he'd sold the rights to the planet. Avi grinned broadly. I know my boss. I'm sure he left a loophole in the contract and more than one. They were sitting in the ship's control room in front of a large screen, where a freeze frame of the footage Avi had taken of the alien ship cast iridescent glows. There were huge clusters of crystals all around, but the side of the ship was free of them, with a few exceptions. 46 exceptions to be exact. The colonists' bodies were fused into the crystals as if they had grown around them, though it wasn't entirely clear how they could grow at such a rate. By the way, how do they grow here at all? Avi thought. This isn't exactly a vat of saturated solution. But the unfortunate people were not completely sealed in the crystals, like flies in amber. Parts of their bodies had been crystallized too. One man was immersed in the crystal only with his left half, while the right half turned into a cluster of tiny crystals remotely resembling a human silhouette. The iridescent glow made it impossible to see the boundary between living flesh and crystalline mass. But Avi decided it was for the best. He got into the shuttle and returned to Sven almost immediately after he discovered the alien ship and the colonists' remains, only taking a few minutes to take pictures. Sven didn't even have to convince him. The sight of the dead colonists was too gruesome. All right, I have some grave questions that I can't answer yet, Sven said, curling his fingers. First, how come none of the reports mention the alien ship? It's obviously been lying there since time immemorial. Secondly, why had the colonists chosen a place near Rainbow Valley for their settlement? That's easy to answer, Avi said. Remember what they call themselves? The Brotherhood of Cosmic Light, and this is the literal embodiment of those words. Suppose so, Sven nodded. But that's not all. Why are there no samples of the crystals? Or even the results of their research? The cultists, by the way, took one and brought it to their temple. Fourth, what is this phenomenon of optical impassibility over the valley? We still can't see the valley from orbit. Fifth, what the hell happened to the cultists? Avi picked up on that. And sixth, whose ship is this? And what are these crystals? The last question is the most important, Sven said thoughtfully. If we answer it, we will probably find the answers to the rest. If we consider where we are, I can bring up one hypothesis. He squinted and looked at Avi. But I'm afraid you wouldn't. He was interrupted by the buzzer of an urgent hyperlink. Given that they were a long way from habitable sectors of the galaxy, and the energy costs of hyperpackets rose exponentially with distance, such a packet meant two things. First, it was Hansen, and second, something out of the ordinary had happened. Avi walked over to the communications console, pressed the receive button, and ran his eyes over the message that appeared on the screen. It was short, only a few lines, but it must have cost the sender 6 figures. I don't understand it, he said, confused. Hansen reports that there's a mutiny in the axial sector. Some lunatics revolted and took over several planets and large stations, including Mars. Earth and the Sirius planets are under blockade. Hansen's headquarters had also been attacked, but his special forces had repelled the attack. He stared at the screen, not believing his eyes. The rebellion is being led by members of the commission who worked here on Matuan. Hansen wants us to come back with the results of the investigation, but we haven't gotten anywhere yet. He turned to Sven and was momentarily speechless with amazement. The scientist looked at him through the protective plastic of a full-face gas mask. In his hands, he held a small cylinder. "Sven, what the hell?" yelled Avi, and rushed toward Tomberg, but didn't make it. At the very last moment, before he passed out, he noticed that the valve on the cylinder was open, and a faint cloud was escaping from the nozzle. There were no dreams, but Avi woke up with the feeling of having been plagued by intrusive nightmares for a long time. Nor was there the usual feeling that his body had rested and recovered, though he was sure he'd slept for 8 to 10 hours at least. Besides, at the very edge of his conscious memory, there was something else troubling and unsettling lurking. He remembered. "Sven!" Avi jumped up from his bunk and rushed to the cabin door, but it wouldn't open. "Sorry, Avi, I had to lock it." Sven's voice came from behind him. Avi turned around swiftly. Sven was looking at him from a small screen on the wall. His mask was gone, of course, and his aged face, Sven was only 35, Avi reminded himself, was clearly concerned. "What the hell is going on?" Avi demanded. "Are you out of your mind?" Sven shook his head. "Not me." Avi became angry. "What are you implying? You're the one who knocked me out and locked me up. If either of us has gone mad—" "I hope not," Sven said. "But I should have taken precautions." "You should have," said Avi, feeling his insides boiling. "Because if I manage to get out of here, you'll be in trouble." "You're not leaving your quarters until we get back, and I talked to Hansen," Sven said calmly. "I don't know what he'll do, but we have to ensure you're not under the influence of the Mercurians. Hansen will send you to a place you haven't even heard of yet." "Wait, what did you say? What Mercurians? The ones who fought the Qatar? What the hell are you talking about? That was 1,000,000 years ago." "The same ones." Sven nodded. "Need I remind you that Matuan is literally on the doorstep of the desolation? That's probably why their ship escaped the Qatar, but not completely. It crashed on Matuan and stayed there the whole time." Avi was so interested that he forgot about his anger and resentment. "Wait, that's nonsense. No biological species would have lasted this long." He stopped suddenly. "Exactly." Sven winked at him as if rewarding him for his cleverness. "From what we know about the Mercurians, It's a foregone conclusion that they were of non-biological nature, if only because the Qatar have managed to enslave every biological species they've encountered in the course of their galactic expansion. It was still unknown whether the Mercurians were rebellious machines of the Qatar themselves or had evolved in some other way. Perhaps the Rainbow Valley will give us the answer. Are you saying that the crystals? I don't know. Sven shrugged. Maybe it's some kind of degraded Mercurian AI system, or maybe the Mercurians themselves, who have degenerated over 1,000,000 years. In any case, through this incredible period, they have carried one thing: hatred for biological civilizations and the desire to destroy them at any cost. I think it's the Mercurians themselves who fell into a pre-intelligent state and began to regain glimmers of their former intelligence only when their former enemies came to visit them again. Wait, what enemies are we? Our ancestors ate bananas and chased gophers in Africa with a club when this war raged. During the war, any intelligent species was an absolute slavery to the Qatar and therefore an enemy of the Mercurians. I'm not sure these crystals in Rainbow Valley realize the war is long over, but when the cultists showed up, they didn't hesitate to take the opportunity to study them. Why not if the prey offers itself as a sacrifice? The cultists thought they'd found God. I guess one of the main methods of warfare for the Mercurians was reprogramming Qatar slaves and sending them back as saboteurs. That's probably also why there's been a surge of activity in the valley. And when the commission showed up, the Mercurians were ready for the operation. Avi asked. What about the communication failures, the invisibility, the incomplete reports? Rudimentary cloaking skills, Sven replied. It doesn't take much intelligence. Chameleons and octopuses can handle it. By the way, the rebellion is almost over. We're not Qatar slaves after all. We have more free will. Right now, the scientists are dealing with the surviving members of the commission. Hopefully, by the time we return, they'll know what to do in your case. My case? Avi asked, looking directly at the screen. Sven sighed. Well, you've been to the valley and exposed to the Mercurians. I'm assuming the programming is done with this fractal light mosaic of theirs. On the surface, you seem fine. But so did the commission members, until they got the chance. I can't take any chances. That's understandable, Avi said, and I'm not even arguing. But I wasn't the only one watching the Mercurian disco. Someone else was looking at it too. I agree, through the screen, but not all the members of the commission landed on the planet, and everyone rebelled. Sven smiled. What makes you think I made an exception? He turned the camera around, showing his quarters to the Avi. I locked myself in the cabin and melted the locks with a small clockwork mine. The ship is flying on autopilot, and when it arrives at Iona, it will slow down and begin transmitting the message I programmed for Hansen and the Intergalactic Special Forces. Synthesizer food isn't like my kitchen delights, but we'll get by for a couple months. It's not that long of an isolation period. He was quiet for a moment. Certainly less than 1,000,000 years on a desert planet,